Today we're going to talk about some special weapons and Space Marine squads, in particular running some numbers between Melta, Plasma and Grav. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So this is a question that I've been asked quite a lot and I really should have got round to making a video on earlier. I find the choice of special weapons, or even whether to take them or not, is quite an interesting one in 8th edition, and sometimes it's hard to weigh up their relative value, particularly when they all strike at different ranges and have different optimal targets. Today we're going to look at the damage profile between the various special weapons, then look at them in terms of point for point, and then discuss some more real world applications and things that might limit them or persuade us to take one over the other. So this first one shows the damage output of 5 special weapons when shooting against various targets. I'm very sorry about the random green splotches on this graph. It turns out I got so into just looking at the numbers that I completely forgot to colour code it whatsoever, so ignore all the green bits whatsoever on this. On the left we have our various different contenders for the guns. First of all we've got the standard bolter, which comes free on your tactical marines, then a melta gun, which we have assumed that we're within the 6-inch melta range for this comparison. A Grav gun, where we've assumed that we're within 9 inches for double shots, a plasma gun within 12 inches, both on overcharge mode and on weak mode, and a flamer, assuming we're within 8-inch effective range. We aren't in the tactical doctrine for this one, but we might mention that just a little bit later. The targets that we're aiming at are a guardsman, a tactical marine, an intercessor, a standard vehicle, and an imperial knight with toughness 8 and a 3+, 5+ invul. Against guardsmen, it's unsurprising that flamers tend to win out. They really are significantly ahead of the curve here, with almost 8 wounds coming out of 5 flamers firing at the enemy. Just as an aside, I'm not saying that we're necessarily getting a squad of 5 flamers, I'm just using it to compare damage, and we're more thinking about using just one special weapon in a tactical squad or something. After that, the next most damaging is actually the plasma gun, which we don't need to overcharge on these ones, because it actually won't make any difference to the damage output. Following that comes the Grav gun, then the standard bolters, and the melta gun is even worse than the bolt guns. If we take aim at some more armoured targets now, some tactical marines and intercessors, then the plasma gun pretty much reigns supreme. Against the tactical marine it doesn't even matter all that much whether we overcharge it or not. You do get a little bit more damage out of it if you do, but it's still the best choice even if you're just not overcharging it. It's pretty much equal to the Grav gun in that case, with the melters and flamers trailing behind. Against the intercessor, unsurprisingly, overcharged plasma is amazing. It's pretty much the ideal tool for killing these guys, with high strength, high AP, and 2 damage. The Grav gun comes second for these targets. Again, they're pretty much the ideal target for the Grav gun as well. But for that no risk of overcharging, you really lose a ton of damage output. It's only really about as good as a melta gun, who catches up with it with the extra chance to wound, the extra AP, and the higher chance of just killing an intercessor in one shot. If we take aim at vehicles last, then again not too surprisingly, it is the melta that wins out. Particularly so against toughness 7 vehicles, where it averages 9.4 wounds compared with the overcharged plasma's 7.4, and even if it wasn't in melta range it would still very slightly outperform the overcharged plasma. Nothing else really competes with these two. The Grav gun's less than half as powerful as the overcharged plasma. If we look at Imperial Knights though last, then things are actually very close between the melta gun and the overcharged plasma due to the extra invul save that the knight has, which allows the plasma to catch up a bit. It's so big a difference that if we weren't in 6-inch melta range, then the plasma gun would actually be a fair bit better. The Grav gun also catches up slightly against knights, just because it wounds them just as well as toughness 7 vehicles, but it's still a decent amount behind. So overall, in terms of raw damage output, the flamer wins out against light infantry, the plasma is best against medium infantry, and it's pretty much a tie between the plasma and the melta against tough vehicles, and the melta only consistently wins if it's able to get in melta range. So let's take a look at these guys when we weight them for points values now. This is assuming 100 points worth of tactical space marines armed with each special weapon, firing at each target. And we have included the cost of the marine into this, because you're not going to be able to buy them without a marine if we're talking about special weapons in standard squads. I know typically you wouldn't be getting entire squads worth of special weapons unless you're using Stern Guard or something, but I think that this is quite helpful when determining bang for your buck when you are thinking about using special weapons in squads. I've fixed the nice colour coordination now, where strong green is the best in each category. So point for point, against the guardsman the flamer is still the best, it's fairly cheap, and if you can get it in range it will certainly outperform the rest of them. The only thing that's changed about this one is that the standard bolt gun pretty much catches up with plasma guns, which is fairly understandable as they're pretty much built to be taking out light infantry as well. If we look at medium infantry, then per point the plasma still wins handily, though both the Grav and the flamer do catch up a little bit as they have a few less points. particularly against tactical marines. If you're not overcharging the plasma, which you probably won't be, they're just as good at taking out 1 wound infantry. But there is really no comparison when you're firing at 2 wound infantry like intercessors. If we look at the vehicles when weighted for points, then the plasma catches up on the Melta a bit, due to it costing a few less points. It's actually to the extent where point for point, overcharged plasma is more damaging against toughness 7 vehicles as well as the Imperial Knight now. This means that if you are willing to overcharge, then on a per point basis, the plasma gun has a pretty much clean sweep throughout all categories, on everything aside from light infantry, where it still does decently and doesn't have to overcharge. Grav does catch up a little bit against the Knights as well, due to being a little bit cheaper than the plasma gun, but it's still significantly less good. So those are the raw numbers then. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual in-game advantages and disadvantages of using each weapon. First of all, from those comparisons we can see that the Melta gun is really highly specialised, only really good against vehicles, and even then, unless it's within 6-inch range, which is very close and hard to set up, it's still not actually going to do as much damage as overcharged plasma, though of course you don't have the chance of blowing yourself up. I think it's worth noting that salamanders will make Melta guns significantly better, though I think this does kind of exemplify the salamanders buff, that they do buff a weapon that isn't particularly overwhelming to start with, and maybe just sort of bring it in line with the others, rather than making it the absolute all-star standout choice. There's no denying though that Melta will be the premier choice against vehicles in a salamander's army with the doctrine up. Talking of doctrines though, the Melta gun is the weapon that gets the least benefit from doctrines. It already has AP-4, and going to AP-5 is very rarely going to matter. Basically, the lower the AP that you have, the more benefit that you get from gaining an extra pip of AP. Finally, 12-inch range is pretty inflexible as it goes, and is certainly a downside compared with plasmas, gravs and bolters, or at least have the option of firing a single shot at longer range if their squad can't get up close to any targets. Next we come to the plasma gun, and naturally its biggest downside is that when you overcharge it, you have the potential to blow yourself up on each roll of a 1. Now this is a major downside, and it means that you could be potentially sniping your own special weapon at the same time that you try and destroy the enemy. If it didn't have the downside, then it would pretty much be the all-star choice all round. The handy thing with Space Marines though is that reroll 1s are really quite easy to acquire, or other things that give you +1 to hit, such as chaplain listeners, signal arrays and other bits. Captain aura rerolls are a reasonable buy-in for your squads anyway, and if they can also cover the chance of overcharging to help out a bit, then that's certainly a good thing. I do also feel that the chance of blowing yourself up is somewhat mitigated by the fact that usually when you've delivered a Space Marine squad to the front lines, there's a very real chance it might just get gunned into oblivion next turn. So having lost the plasma gun already isn't always the worst thing in the world, as you might have been just about to lose it anyway. If it is absolutely crucial that you keep it around for another turn though, then you can always have the option of firing it on slightly weaker mode, but will affect the damage output by quite a lot on anything but 1 wound infantry. But I think that having 2 firing modes and having the option for which one to choose is actually really quite powerful, meaning that you can always play optimally for your particular plasma gun. Finally, having a max range of 24 inches is better than any of the other weapons here, and it means that if you do find yourself a little bit further from the enemy, then you can still chip away meaningfully at the enemy, rather than just not being able to shoot at all. 12-inch optimal range is also great for when you deep strike in and you have to set up 9 inches away, which is pretty much the most guaranteed way of delivering special weapons to the front line. Under normal circumstances, the flamer won't be able to shoot at all, the grav gun won't be rapid firing, and the Melta gun won't be in rapid fire range, but the plasma gun is absolutely happy at 12 inches, and that's a very solid little synergy. Moving on to that grav gun, I do feel like it's just a little bit underwhelming for its points cost at the moment. Even if it did have 12-inch range and was pretty much the same as the plasma gun range-wise, which it isn't, its damage output is significantly worse than the plasma gun in every single area. And as we said before, it's not really all that easy to deliver it to within 9-inch rapid fire range. If it's deep striking, then it's not going to get there unless you have long-range marksmen or something like that. So it's going to be very rare that it actually gets its efficient shots off. Having said that, having an 18-inch fire mode is useful, but again significantly worse than the plasma gun's 24 inches. Overall, I can see why people aren't really running grav guns very much this edition. Next we have the flamer, who is beset by the similar problems, in that getting into 8-inch range reliably is hard. You're not very likely to get there by running up the board. You either need a transport vehicle or to deep strike in a drop pod or something, and if you deep strike it, you sort of need to combine it with the long range marksman successor chapter trait to get that extra 3 inches to get it in range. Now I think that this is viable in a salamander's army, where you're really focusing on getting the max out of flame weapons. They get +1 to wound in the tactical doctrine, and they've got a number of different tricks to try and get more damage damage out of the flamers, and I think it can be viable in that situation. In particular, out of these weapons, the flamer does get the best out of the tactical doctrine as well, as going from AP 0 to AP -1 is the biggest deal compared with going from AP -3 to AP -4 for example. Unless you're salamanders and getting those very helpful +1 to wound rolls and their extra flamer tricks, then it's only fairly good against light infantry, and it's a bit borderline versus medium infantry, where plasma and grav tend to outshine it. I think that the main problem with the flamer is that in the marine list as it stands, the marines are very good at dealing with hordes and light infantry, just because they can spit out a million bolt shots with bolter discipline, or deploy some incredibly high rate of fire units such as aggressors or space marine centurions with hurricane bolters. These guys have much longer range and very similar if not better damage output than the flamer, meaning that it doesn't exactly incentivize you to take it on a less reliable platform that really has to struggle to get within a very short range to be effective. Flamers also have to compete with just taking more bolt gun infantry as well, where the bolt guns aren't all that much less efficient than flamers, and you get all the benefits of having more bodies on the table, as we'll talk about in a second. Finally, one other potential advantage for flamers is that they do give you a bit of better overwatch, and it could be fairly significant en masse in say things like Salamander Stern Guard squads. In general though, this isn't enough to sway me in favour of the flamer, and I wouldn't advocate taking one as a special weapon in Space Marine lists for most chapters in normal circumstances. Finally, you need to remember to weigh up all of these against just taking more guys with bolters, and this actually has plenty of advantages of its own. Taking more guys with bolters means that your squads will have better durability, as you can put the points for special weapons into more bodies, and just have more power armor for them to chew through. By not overloading them with special weapons as well, you'll also make filling out battalions very cheap for things like tactical marines with 60-point squads. And also on a per point basis, you'll have better close combat because each additional space marine that you buy in can also fight in combat as well. So if you have less of them armed with special weapons, they won't be hitting as many times. In terms of range, the bolt gun can actually also be effective at a full 24-inch range as well. If they stand still and utilise bolter discipline, then it means that they can fire just as happily at a full 24-inch range compared with having to get up close and personal and be within 12-inch range to have a decent effect. Just like flamers, going from AP 0 to AP -1 is excellent in the tactical doctrine, so they get great benefit there, and that will buff them up compared with the rest. And some chapters also have affinity with bolters, such as the Imperial and Crimson Fists, who will get more out of them than any normal chapter would, and that's going to further sway you to just fill out squads with bolters rather than messing around with special weapons. So overall, what are my opinions on special weapons then? For me, if I was going to buy a special weapon in a mixed marine squad, such as a tactical squad, my favourite is the plasma gun, as it has additional range, better flexibility with the different firing modes, and has very good damage output against basically all targets. I think that is worth paying the price of the chance of overheating for, and obviously they'll become even more viable if you are thinking about running them in a squad that's near a captain. I think all round, point for point, they are the best upgrade for special weapons in most circumstances. Melta guns and just melta weapons in general at the moment I'm not really sold on. I think they're just a little bit expensive for what you get as damage output, and they're nowhere near as flexible as the plasma gun. I generally wouldn't tend to bother with them unless I was playing salamanders for the +1 to wound, and even then I'm not entirely convinced. Flamers, on the other hand, I think tend to get outcompeted by the other Space Marine anti-infantry options, or just taking more bodies with bolters, but compared with melta guns, I think that these guys can be absolutely excellent in a Salamanders chapter, particularly if you're doing something like running big squads of Stern Guards with combi flamers, and using that long-range marksman successor trait to make them all be able to shoot out of a drop pod or something. For general tactical squad use though, I wouldn't generally recommend them. I'd rather just have more guys with bolters, as then you're not messing with your own positioning trying to get the flamer in close, and you have all the other advantages that having more bodies on the table would give you. The grav gun's a little bit underwhelming at the moment. It's not awful, but if I was looking to optimise my list I wouldn't take any, because they just lose out to the other options really. Finally, there's the option of no special weapons and just getting more bodies on the table, which honestly I think at the moment is probably the most competitive option. Cheaper battalions, more long-range bolter fire, and not having to worry about a delivery system for your grunt squads are all really nice bonuses, and for just foot-slogging tactical marine squads, I think that you will profit more from just including more guys with bolters on the table, rather than trying to make them damage dealers with special weapons, unless you are investing in a delivery system such as a drop pod, rhino or something like that. I would tend to be a bit more tempted by the heavy weapons that you can buy in for the squad, just because they have longer range and synergise a bit better with their bolters. Though of course I will be always on the side of taking any storm bolters that you can on the squad sergeants whenever possible. So in summary, my feelings are, plasma guns are the best of the special weapons, melters and flamers might be viable if you're running salamanders for extra wound rolls, but don't underestimate the value of just leaving the special weapons off and getting more power armoured bodies on the table. Thanks very much for listening to Auspex Tactics. If you have any thoughts yourself on the special weapon debate, then please let us know down in the comments and how you've been running them over 8th edition. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe where we have more Space Marine content coming out every few days, as well as plenty of other 40k content. If you've been enjoying the videos recently, then the channel does have a Patreon page, which is what allows me to keep on focusing the time on making these videos and keep the content coming. As well as helping to support the channel, you'll also be able to see some new videos early, get to vote on future videos for the channel coming up, and also participate in the occasional prize draw, where I post out some free models to one random Patreon. If any of that sounds interesting, or you'd just like to support the channel, the link is in the description below. And as always, a massive thank you to my current Patreons for helping make the channel possible. In any case, a big thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.